A cop arrests an innocent black girl at school, thinking it's just another routine case. But the moment she asks to make a phone call, everything changes. Because the man who picks up? He's the U.S. Attorney General, and he's not just a powerful name, he's her father. What happens when the law is forced to answer for its own mistakes? And how far will a teenage girl go, not for revenge, but for justice? This isn't just a story about power, it's about truth, race, and the courage to stand alone when the whole world's watching. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Nia's pencil moved with precise strokes across the corner of her notebook, bringing life to the atoms she was sketching. She gave each one a distinct personality, a mischievous grin here, raised eyebrows there. The scientific diagrams transformed into characters under her careful hand, telling their own silent story in the margins of her notes. The AP Science classroom at Langston Prep Academy gleamed with an almost sterile perfection. Sunlight bounced off the polished lab tables and pristine glass beakers. Everything had its place, from the perfectly aligned chairs to the meticulously organized periodic table that dominated the front wall. The room could have been featured in a private school brochure, except for the underlying tension that hung in the air like static before a storm. Nia sat in the back row, her navy blue blazer crisp against the white of her uniform shirt. Around her, 23 other students listened to Ms. Ellison's lecture on molecular bonds, or at least pretended to listen. A few seats ahead, Jessica Thompson was secretly texting under her desk. 2 rows over, Michael Chen was nodding off behind his textbook, but Ms. Ellison's sharp eyes seemed to pass over these infractions, landing instead on Nia with clockwork regularity. "The sharing of electrons," Ms. Ellison said, her voice carrying that particular tone she reserved for certain students. Cool, precise, with an edge of something else beneath the surface. "Can anyone tell me why this is important in covalent bonding?" Several hands shot up. Nia's remained down, though she knew the answer. She added another detail to her atom sketch instead, a tiny bow tie that made the oxygen molecule look distinguished. "Ms. Jackson?" Ms. Ellison called out despite the forest of raised hands. "Perhaps you'd like to contribute to the discussion?" Nia looked up, meeting Ms. Ellison's gaze steadily. "In covalent bonding, atoms share electron pairs to achieve a stable electron configuration," she answered, her voice quiet but clear. "This sharing creates a stronger bond between the atoms." Ms. Ellison's lips tightened slightly. "Correct," she said, turning back to the whiteboard without acknowledgement. A few students shifted in their seats. They'd seen this dance before. The way Ms. Ellison would call on Nia when her hand wasn't raised, the subtle dismissal of correct answers, the constant scrutiny. The lesson continued, minutes ticking by on the oversized clock above the door. Nia returned to her sketching, adding more personality to her atomic family while taking careful notes. The room felt colder than usual, despite the spring sunshine streaming through the windows. Suddenly, Ms. Ellison stopped mid-sentence about electron configurations. She patted her pockets, then walked to her desk, moving papers around with increasing urgency. "My phone," she announced to the class, her voice carrying a strange flatness. "It seems to be missing." The statement hung in the air for a moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, Ms. Ellison turned and looked directly at Nia. The message in her gaze was clear as crystal. Students began to turn in their seats, some subtle, others obvious. A few whispers started up, quickly silenced by Ms. Ellison's raised hand. Nia kept her expression neutral, though her pencil pressed harder against the paper, making the atom's smile look more like a grimace. The next few minutes stretched like taffy. Ms. Ellison made a show of searching her desk, checking her lab coat, looking under nearby tables. She never once looked in the direction of her own bag, sitting partially open on the chair behind her desk. The heavy classroom door opened with a click that seemed unnaturally loud. 2 security officers entered, Mr. Roberts and Mr. Thompson, their badges catching the fluorescent lights. Without hesitation or question, they walked directly to Nia's desk at the back of the room. "Stand up, please," Mr. Roberts said, his voice gruff but almost apologetic. "We need to check your bag." Nia rose slowly, her movements measured and calm. She could feel the phones coming out now, students barely trying to hide as they started recording. Figures, someone muttered from the middle of the room, probably Drake Williams, though she didn't turn to look. Ms. Ellison stood at the front of the classroom, hands clasped in front of her, watching with an expression of manufactured concern. She made no move to intervene, ask questions, or protect her student. The officers dumped the contents of Nia's bag onto her desk. Notebooks, textbooks, pencil case, lunch money, no phone. They checked the pockets, the lining, under her chair. Then, without warning, Mr. Thompson pulled out his handcuffs. The metal clicked around Nia's wrists, cold and tight. She didn't resist, didn't speak, didn't give them the reaction they were waiting for. Her face remained composed, though her fists clenched behind her back until her nails bit into her palms. They led her out of the classroom, past rows of staring faces and phone cameras. The hallway seemed longer than usual, each step echoing against the polished floors. Students pressed against classroom windows as she passed, their faces a blur of shock, curiosity, and something darker. The principal, Dr. Matthews, stood outside his office as they approached. He looked down at his shoes as they passed, suddenly very interested in his leather loafers. The administrative holding room was at the end of the hall, a small, windowless space with 2 chairs and a table bolted to the floor. Inside, Nia finally spoke. Her voice was steady, controlled. "I'd like to make my phone call." Mr. Roberts hesitated, glancing at Mr. Thompson. Protocol said they should wait for the police, but something in Nia's calm demeanor made him reach for the phone on the wall. He held it out to her, uncuffing one hand. Nia dialed a number from memory. The line connected almost immediately. She spoke just 2 words. "It happened." Then she hung up, holding her wrist out for the cuff to be replaced. Outside, through the small window in the door, black SUVs began pulling into the school's circular driveway, their government plates gleaming in the midday sun. The black SUVs rolled into Langston Prep Academy's circular driveway with silent authority. Their tinted windows reflected the spring sunlight, government plates catching the light. The effect was immediate. Like ripples in a pond, word spread through the hallways. Staff members who had been hovering near the administrative offices suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. The school secretary grabbed her purse and muttered something about an early lunch. Dr. Matthews stood in his office doorway, tugging at his silk tie as if it were suddenly too tight. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the building's careful climate control. He'd dealt with angry parents before, wealthy ones too. But this was different. This was the United States Attorney General. The SUVs came to a precise stop at the main entrance. Security personnel emerged first, scanning the area with practiced efficiency. Then the back door opened, and Jeremiah Jackson stepped out. His charcoal suit was impeccable, his presence commanding. He didn't storm up the steps or show any outward sign of anger. He didn't need to. Power radiated from him like heat from asphalt on a summer day. Behind him came a woman in a navy blazer, her badge visible at her hip. She carried a leather portfolio and wore an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and found most of it wanting. Federal investigator Sarah Chen had built her career on cases exactly like this. They moved through the school's front doors like a quiet storm. Students pressed themselves against lockers, phones disappearing into pockets. Teachers stepped back into their classrooms. The click of expensive shoes on polished floors echoed through suddenly silent hallways. Dr. Matthews attempted a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Mr. Attorney General, sir, I can explain." "Dr. Matthews." Jeremiah's voice was soft, controlled. "I'd like to see the security footage from today's incident, all of it. And I mean all of it. Hallway cameras, classroom cameras, body cams, everything." The principal's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. Of course, right this way." Investigator Chen spoke up, her tone professionally neutral. "We'll also need complete records of any disciplinary actions taken against Nia Jackson during her time here, and witness statements from everyone present during today's events." "The officers were just following standard protocol, Doctor." Matthews began, leading them toward the security office. "When items go missing..." "When items go missing," Jeremiah interrupted smoothly, "do you typically handcuff students without evidence? Without due process? without even searching the reported location of the missing item first? The security office was cramped with all of them inside. Mr. Roberts and Mr. Thompson stood awkwardly against the back wall, their earlier confidence evaporating under Jeremiah's steady gaze. "Sir," Mr. Thompson started, "we were called to respond." "By Ms. Ellison," Investigator Chen cut in, reviewing a preliminary report. "Who reported her phone missing and immediately suggested searching Ms. Jackson? Can you explain why Nia was singled out?" The officers exchanged glances. Mr. Roberts cleared his throat. "Well, given the situation—" "What situation?" Jeremiah's voice remained quiet, but there was steel beneath the silk now. "Please, elaborate. I'm very interested in hearing what situation would justify handcuffing a 14-year-old honor student without probable cause." Neither officer could meet his eyes. The silence stretched until Dr. Matthews attempted to fill it. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office." "Perhaps," Jeremiah agreed. "You should show me to my daughter first." The walk to the holding room felt longer than it actually was. Jeremiah's presence seemed to fill the entire hallway. When they reached the door, he paused, something flickering across his composed features. Pain, perhaps, or anger carefully contained. Inside, Nia sat straight-backed in the metal chair, hands folded in her lap. She didn't look up when the door opened, didn't acknowledge her father's entrance. Her uniform was still perfectly neat, her expression calm, but her knuckles were white where her fingers laced together. Jeremiah crossed the room in 3 steps but stopped short of touching her. "Nia," he said softly. She kept her gaze fixed on the wall ahead. Investigator Chen's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Thompson, given the clear violation of protocol and civil rights demonstrated here, your services will no longer be required at Langston Prep Academy, effective immediately." The security officer started to protest, but one look at Jeremiah's face changed his mind. He removed his badge with shaking fingers and set it on the table. "Dr. Matthews," Jeremiah said, still watching his daughter, "will be in touch regarding the rest of this situation. Nia, let's go home." Finally, Nia stood. She gathered her bag, its contents hastily repacked after being dumped out, and walked toward the door. When Jeremiah gently placed a hand on her shoulder, she shrugged it off without breaking stride. The walk back through the school was silent. Students and teachers watched from doorways as the Attorney General of the United States escorted his daughter out, his security detail clearing a path ahead of them. Ms. Ellison, standing in her classroom doorway, went pale when they passed. Her phone was clearly visible on her desk, exactly where she'd left it. Outside, the spring air was warm, but Nia shivered once as she climbed into the SUV. Jeremiah sat beside her, dismissing his usual driver to take the wheel himself. The vehicle pulled away from the school smoothly, leaving Investigator Chen behind to continue gathering evidence. Traffic moved around them, other drivers unaware of the storm of emotions contained within the black government vehicle. Nia sat perfectly still, her sketchbook resting unopened in her lap. The same sketchbook that, just hours ago, had been filled with smiling atoms and scientific whimsy now lay dormant under her still hands. Jeremiah navigated through the city streets with the same careful control he applied to everything else. Occasionally he would glance at his daughter, looking like he wanted to speak. But Nia's silence was a wall between them, as solid as the bulletproof glass surrounding them. The drive home stretched out, marked only by the changing of traffic lights and the steady hum of the engine. Nia didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't rage. She simply sat, her hands resting on the closed cover of her sketchbook, while the city rolled past outside the tinted windows. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the Jackson residence, casting long shadows across the granite countertops. Nia sat at the breakfast bar, methodically spreading peanut butter on whole wheat toast. Her movements were precise, controlled, just like everything else about her since yesterday's incident. Behind her, Jeremiah paced the length of the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear. He'd been making calls since dawn, his voice a steady murmur of legal terms and measured responses. He'd loosened his tie, and his usually pristine shirt showed signs of wrinkles, small tells that revealed the strain beneath his composed exterior. "Yes, I understand," he said into the phone, glancing at his daughter's back. "No, we're handling this internally for now." A pause. "I appreciate your discretion." Nia didn't look up from her toast. The house felt emptier without her mother's presence. She was at a medical conference in Boston, unaware of what had happened. The silence between father and daughter stretched like a rubber band, growing more tense with each passing moment. Finally, Jeremiah ended his call and sat down across from Nia. He placed his phone face down on the counter, a gesture of full attention that would have meant more if it hadn't taken 23 calls to get there. "Nia," he began, his voice gentle but firm. "The school called this morning. Ms. Ellison claims they found her phone." Nia took another bite of toast, chewing slowly. "It was supposedly in a locker," Jeremiah continued. "Locker 247, registered to Marcus Thompson." He waited a beat. "He transferred out 2 weeks ago." For the first time that morning, Nia looked up. Her fork clattered against the plate. Confusion flickered across her face, breaking through her careful mask of indifference. "Marcus?" "But he moved to Atlanta." Her voice was hoarse from disuse. "Then why did she arrest me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Jeremiah's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, sighed, and stood up. "We're going to figure this out," he promised, but Nia had already looked away. 2 hours later, Nia walked through Langston Prep's main entrance. The hallways hushed as she passed, conversations dropping to whispers. Students who usually ignored her now stared openly, then quickly looked away when she met their eyes. Her footsteps echoed against the polished floors, each step measured and deliberate. Outside her first class, Emma Chen, who sat next to her in AP Science for months, suddenly remembered she needed to visit her locker. Others found urgent reasons to step aside, creating a bubble of empty space around Nia. Ms. Ellison's classroom felt colder than usual. The teacher didn't acknowledge Nia's presence, didn't call on her during discussions, didn't even look in her direction. It was as if Nia had become invisible, except when Ms. Ellison handed back their lab reports, dropping Nia's paper on her desk from a height that scattered her carefully drawn diagrams. The day dragged on. No one apologized. No one explained. Even the security officer who replaced Mr. Thompson walked past without meeting her eyes. The silence felt deliberate, coordinated, like a well-rehearsed play where everyone knew their parts except her. At home that evening, Jeremiah's voice carried from his study. "What do you mean the footage skipped?" He was using his courtroom voice now, the one that made witnesses nervous. "A system glitch? During exactly that time period?" Nia sat on the stairs listening. She could picture the scene, her father standing behind his desk, one hand pressed flat against the polished wood, the other holding his phone in a grip tight enough to whiten his knuckles. "No," he was saying, "that's not acceptable. I want a full technical analysis of your security systems. Yes, including the backup servers." A pause. "Dr. Matthews, need I remind you of the legal implications?" Nia didn't wait to hear the rest. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, each step heavy with the weight of understanding. The system glitch was too convenient, too precise in its timing, just like the phone appearing in Marcus's old locker, just like the immediate assumption of her guilt. Her bedroom was a sanctuary of art and science, walls covered with her drawings of molecular structures reimagined as characters, star charts transformed into stories. She sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at yesterday's sketchbook page where happy atoms danced across the margins. The moment played again in her mind. Ms. Ellison's flat announcement, the security officer's immediate focus on her, the handcuffs cold against her wrists. She saw again the students recording on their phones, heard the muttered figures from the back row, remembered how no one, not one person, had spoken up. With sudden determination, Nia grabbed her sketchbook. She ripped out the pages of smiling atoms and complex compounds, letting them flutter to the floor like fallen leaves. In their place, she began to write. First came Deshaun Carter, suspended last month for disrupting class, when he questioned a historical inaccuracy in the textbook. Then Jasmine Williams, sent to detention for wearing her hair in traditional African braids that supposedly violated dress code. Marcus Thompson himself, who'd transferred after 3 citations for aggressive behavior, all from trying to defend himself against bullies. The names filled the page. Some she knew personally, others she'd only observed from a distance. But each one represented a pattern she'd felt but never documented. Until now. In the margin she wrote Locker 247 and drew a circle around it, then another circle, and another, until the number stood out like a target. She added dates, times, locations, drew lines connecting events that seemed random before but now revealed a clear design. Her hand moved steadily across the paper, recording everything with the same precision she used in her scientific illustrations. There were no tears, no emotional outbursts, just the scratch of pen on paper, building a case one detail at a time. Downstairs, she could still hear her father on the phone, fighting this battle the only way he knew how, through legal channels and institutional pressure. But Nia had her own methods. She had her observer's eye, her artist's memory, and now she had purpose. She wrote another name, then another. The list grew longer as the evening shadows stretched across her bedroom floor. Each entry was a piece of evidence, each connection a step toward understanding the larger picture. The sketchbook that had once held her artistic dreams now held something else, a record of systematic injustice, carefully documented by a 14-year-old girl who refused to let her voice be silenced. The next morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill. Nia walked through Langston Prep's empty hallways, her footsteps echoing in the pre-class quiet. She'd arrived 45 minutes early, determined to make every minute count. Near the library, she spotted Marcus Chen sitting alone at a study table, hunched over a textbook. He was a sophomore who kept to himself, often fading into the background during busy school days. Like her, he seemed to prefer the quiet of early mornings. Nia approached his table, clutching her sketchbook. "Hey, Marcus," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up, surprised that anyone was talking to him. His dark eyes were wary behind wire-rimmed glasses. Sure. Have you ever been written up? Unfairly, I mean?" Nia kept her voice neutral, but her grip on the sketchbook tightened. Marcus's shoulders tensed. He glanced around the empty library before answering. "Yeah, last month, for chewing gum in Ms. Peterson's class." He paused, then added quietly, "White kids were doing it too. She only called me out." Nia opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. "Would you tell me more? About other times?" Something in her tone must have reassured him. Marcus pushed his textbook aside and leaned forward. "There was this time in gym class when Jake Thompson kept throwing balls at my head. Coach saw it happen 3 times. Guess who got written up for aggressive behavior?" Nia's pen moved across the page, recording dates, details, witnesses. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Sarah Chen, no relation, got detention for talking back when she corrected Mr. Roberts about Chinese history. Devin Williams was suspended for wearing a durag, but Brad can wear his baseball cap backwards all day." His words came faster now, like a dam breaking. "They always have some excuse, some rule that only seems to apply to us." Nia's list grew longer with each story. By the time the first warning bell rang, she had filled 3 pages with similar accounts, each one a small injustice that added up to something much larger. The morning classes passed in a blur. Nia barely heard her teachers, her mind focused on the growing pattern in her notebook. When lunch period finally arrived, she headed straight for the cafeteria's back corner where Amira always sat. Amira was already there, typing furiously on her laptop. Her dark curls were pulled back in a messy bun, and her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision. She looked up as Nia approached, immediately noting her friend's intense expression. "Okay, Spill," Amira said, closing her laptop. "You've got that look." Nia slid into the seat beside her, keeping her voice low despite their isolated location. "Remember that glitch in the security footage? The one that conveniently erased everything around Ms. Ellison's phone incident? Yeah, that was sketchy as hell." Amira leaned closer, her eyes sharp with interest. "It's not just that." Nia opened her sketchbook, showing Amira the lists she'd compiled. Look at these patterns. The write-ups, the suspensions, they're targeting specific students. And Ms. Ellison? Her disciplinary record shows more incidents with students of color in one semester than most teachers have in 5 years. Amira's expression grew serious as she scanned the pages. This is big, Nia. Like, really big. She tapped her fingers on the table, a habit she had when processing complex problems. But you'll need more than just stories. If you're going to war, you'll need proof. And a plan. I know. Nia glanced around the cafeteria, lowering her voice further. That's why I need your help. You understand systems, computers. There has to be more evidence somewhere. Amira was already pulling her laptop back open. Let me see what I can find about these glitches. Systems don't just fail at convenient moments. Someone has to make them fail. They spent the rest of lunch period huddled over Amira's laptop, speaking in whispers and making notes. Neither noticed the quiet figure watching them from across the cafeteria. Later that afternoon, Nia was standing outside the AV room, studying the keycard reader on the door. She jumped when a voice spoke behind her. Looking for something? She turned to find Mr. Lewis, one of the school's janitors, standing there with his cleaning cart. He'd worked at Langston Prep for over 20 years, always present but rarely noticed by students or staff. His dark face was lined with age and wisdom, and his eyes held a knowing look. No, I was just... Nia started, but Mr. Lewis held up a hand. I've been here a long time, he said quietly. Seen a lot of things, some changes, but mostly... He trailed off, reaching into his pocket. Sometimes you need the right key to unlock the truth. He pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand. Inside, Nia felt the hard edge of a keycard. Use it before they change the locks, Mr. Lewis said, already turning away with his cart. And be careful, Miss Jackson. After the final bell, Nia waited in the library until most students had left. Her heart pounded as she approached the teacher's lounge, clutching Mr. Lewis's keycard. The hallway was empty, but every shadow made her jump. The card worked. The door clicked open with a soft beep, and Nia slipped inside. The lounge was dim, lit only by the late afternoon sun through Venetian blinds. She moved quickly to the filing cabinet where complaint logs were kept. The binder was exactly where Mr. Lewis had said it would be. Nia pulled it out, her hands shaking slightly as she opened it. Page after page of blank forms greeted her, with only a few actually filled out. It was too empty, suspiciously empty for a school this size. She pulled out her phone and began taking pictures, making sure to capture every page, every date, every signature. The evidence of absence was just as damning as the evidence of presence. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Nia's heart leaped into her throat. She quickly replaced the binder and looked around frantically. The supply closet stood open nearby. She dove inside just as the lounge door opened. Pressed against cleaning supplies, barely daring to breathe, Nia listened. The click of heels on tile approached, then stopped. No, we need to handle this carefully. Ms. Ellison's voice was clear in the quiet room. That Jackson girl is becoming a problem. Yes, I know who her father is. A pause. If she pushes this, she'll regret it. I'll make sure of that. The sound of Ms. Ellison's heels faded down the hallway, but Nia remained frozen in the supply closet, her heart hammering against her ribs. The chemical smell of cleaning products filled her nose as she counted to 60, then counted again. Only when the building fell completely silent did she dare to move. Easing the closet door open, Nia peered into the empty teacher's lounge. Shadows stretched across the carpet from the setting sun outside. She clutched her phone tight, its screen still showing the last photo she'd taken of the complaint log. With quick, careful steps, she made her way to the door and pressed her ear against it. Silence. The hallway was deserted when she finally slipped out. Her footsteps echoed slightly as she speed-walked toward the exit, trying to look natural in case any security cameras were watching. Only when she pushed through the heavy front doors and felt the cool evening air did she allow herself to breathe normally again. The walk home felt longer than usual. Nia's mind kept replaying Ms. Ellison's words. If she pushes this, she'll regret it. The threat hung in the air like storm clouds, but instead of fear, Nia felt a strange calm settling over her. She'd found something they clearly didn't want anyone to see. At home, Nia spread the photos from her phone across her desk, arranging them chronologically. The complaint log pages stared back at her, most of them pristine and empty. She pulled up the school's demographic information on her laptop. 27 black students total at Langston Prep. The numbers didn't add up. "Only 2, she whispered, counting the documented complaints again. Just 2 out of 27. She knew it wasn't because nothing had happened. Her own incident hadn't even made it into the log. Pulling out her sketchbook, she began making notes, drawing connecting lines between dates and names. The pattern was too perfect to be accidental. This wasn't just missing documentation, it was systematic erasure. The next morning, Nia arrived early again. She found Jamal, a junior, in the library before first period. He was alone, reading a thick physics textbook. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, sliding into the chair across from him. Jamal looked up, surprised. "Sure, what's up? Has Ms. Ellison ever given you trouble, or any teacher?" His expression changed subtly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight shift in posture. "Why?" "I'm collecting stories," Nia explained, keeping her voice low. "Things that happen but never get reported." Jamal was quiet for a long moment, then closed his book. "Last semester, Ms. Ellison said I was being aggressive because I kept raising my hand in class. Said I was trying to dominate the discussion." He shook his head. "I was just excited about the material." "Did you file a complaint? Why bother?" Jamal's laugh was bitter. "No one listens." During lunch, Nia found Tanya and Deshawn sitting together in the courtyard. They were both sophomores, both honor roll students. When she approached them with her questions, their stories spilled out like they'd been waiting for someone to ask. "Random locker searches," Tanya said, twisting her braids nervously. "Always my locker, never anyone else's." Deshawn nodded. "Yeah, and those attitude warnings when you speak up in class? White kids can debate all day, but if we do it..." "Did either of you ever report it?" Nia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Report it to who?" Tanya scoffed. "The same people doing it?" Nia added their stories to her growing collection, each one fitting perfectly into the pattern she'd discovered in the complaint logs. The system wasn't just broken, it was designed to silence. After the final bell, Nia met Amira in their usual spot behind the cafeteria. Her friend was practically vibrating with excitement, her laptop balanced on her knees. "You're not going to believe what I found," Amira said, fingers flying across the keyboard. "I've been digging through archived newsletters from Riverside High. That's where Ms. Ellison taught before coming here." Nia leaned in close as Amira pulled up a scan of an old-school newspaper. The headline read, "Equipment Donation Controversy Leads to Student Investigation." "Most of the articles about it are gone," Amira explained, scrolling through fragments of archived web pages. "The school district buried everything they could, but look at this part." She pointed to a paragraph that mentioned serious allegations and missing equipment worth thousands of dollars. The article ended abruptly with no resolution or follow-up story. "There's more," Amira continued, pulling up another window. "I found comments on old social media posts, all deleted now but still cached in some places. Students were trying to expose something big, but it all just disappeared, just like our security footage glitch." Nia stared at the headline, her eyes narrowing as the pieces began falling into place. The pattern at Langston wasn't new. It was refined, perfected through practice. "Let's dig deeper," she said, pulling out her sketchbook. The pages were filled now with names, dates, and connecting lines, a web of silence that was finally starting to speak. Amira grinned, cracking her knuckles. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've already started mapping the school's network architecture. If there are digital breadcrumbs, we'll find them." They sat together in the fading afternoon light, surrounded by evidence of a system designed to erase. But this time, Nia thought, someone was paying attention. This time, Someone was keeping records. The evening sun cast long shadows through Nia's living room as she stood in front of her father's home office door. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and knocked firmly. Inside, she could hear the shuffle of papers and the soft click of a laptop closing. "Come in," Jeremiah called. Nia stepped into the warmly lit office, taking in the familiar smell of leather and old books. Her father sat behind his mahogany desk, his tie loosened after a long day of meetings. He looked tired, but his eyes were alert as they met hers. "Dad?" Nia began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Remember that case file you mentioned last year? The one from Riverside High?" Jeremiah's expression shifted slightly, a small crease forming between his brows. "That's sealed, Nia." "I know." She moved closer to his desk, standing straight like she'd seen him do in countless photographs. "But it's connected to Ms. Ellison. I need to see it." Her father leaned back in his chair, studying her face. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, he spoke. "This is about more than what happened to you, isn't it?" Nia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her father's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer before he stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. The metal drawer slid open with a soft scrape. "I shouldn't do this," he said quietly, rifling through folders. "But I've taught you to fight for justice your whole life. It would be hypocritical to stop you now." He pulled out a thick manila envelope worn at the edges. Nia reached for it, but Jeremiah held it just out of reach for a moment. "Whatever you find in here," he said, his voice serious, "be smart about how you use it. Sometimes the right move isn't the obvious one." He handed her the file and walked past her to the door. Before leaving, he paused, his hand on the doorframe. "I trust your judgment, Nia." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the weight of hidden truths in her hands. 20 minutes later, Nia sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor with Amira, the contents of the file spread out between them. The overhead light cast a harsh glare on the documents as they pored over every detail. "Look at this," Amira said, pointing to a paragraph in the middle of a legal document. "Elijah Carter, sophomore honor student, accused of stealing an entire cart of laptops worth thousands of dollars." Nia leaned in closer, her finger tracing along the lines of text. "It says the school's security cameras were temporarily offline during the alleged theft." She exchanged a knowing look with Amira. "Sound familiar?" They continued reading, the story unfolding like a familiar nightmare. Elijah had maintained his innocence, but a white student named Brandon Walsh had come forward, claiming he'd seen Elijah with the cart after hours. The accusation had been enough for immediate expulsion. "Wait," Amira said suddenly, grabbing another page. "This is where it gets interesting." Brandon later admitted that Ms. Ellison had pressured him into making the accusation, said she'd been suggesting for weeks that Elijah was trouble. Nia's hands clenched into fists as she read the settlement details. The school had paid Elijah's family to keep quiet, buried the incident in sealed records, and Ms. Ellison had simply transferred to Langston Prep 2 months later. "There," Nia said, circling a phrase with her pencil. "Pattern of disproportionate action. They knew what she was doing, and they just let her move on to another school." Amira pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Let's find Elijah. Social media, graduation records, anything." For the next hour, they searched through various platforms following digital breadcrumbs. Finally, Amira let out a small cry of triumph. "Got him. Well, sort of. I found his sister, Jasmine Carter. She's a freshman at Howard University now." Nia leaned over to look at the profile. Jasmine's face smiled back at them, bright and confident in her college sweatshirt. "Can you message her?" "Already did," Amira replied, showing Nia the carefully worded message she'd sent. "She's online now. Wait, she's responding." They watched as 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a message popped up. "Call tomorrow at 4 p.m. I remember everything." Nia sat back, her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to organize all of this, make it clear, make it impossible to ignore." She stood up and walked to her bedroom wall, the largest empty space in the room. From her desk, she pulled out a roll of string, pushpins, and all the documents they'd gathered. One by one, she began pinning them up, connecting events with red string, creating a visual timeline of injustice. Amira helped her arrange the pieces, adding printouts of the complaint logs, screenshots of the archived newsletters, and photos of the students who'd shared their stories. In the center, they placed Ms. Ellison's official school portrait, her smile now seeming more predatory than professional. The wall transformed into a quiet war room, each string telling a story of systematic discrimination. Naya stepped back, taking in the full scope of what they'd uncovered. The pattern was undeniable now, stretching back years and across multiple schools. "This is bigger than just you," Amira said softly, standing beside her. "This is everyone she's ever targeted." Nia nodded, her eyes tracing the red strings that connected past to present. Tomorrow's call with Jasmine could be the key to unlocking everything, another voice to add to the growing chorus of truth. As the night grew later, Amira gathered her things to leave. At the bedroom door, she turned back to look at their work. "You know this is going to be hard, right? People like Ms. Ellison, they don't go down easily." "I know," Nia replied, still studying the wall. "But neither do we." After Amira left, Nia sat on her bed facing the evidence wall. Each string, each document, each connection represented a student who'd been silenced, pushed out, or forced to disappear. Tomorrow, she would talk to Jasmine and add another piece to the puzzle. But tonight, she let herself feel the weight of what they'd discovered, and the responsibility of making it right. The computer lab hummed with the quiet whir of machines as Amira practically dragged Nia through the door during their lunch period. Most students were in the cafeteria, leaving the lab nearly empty except for a freshman playing games in the corner with headphones on. "You have to see this," Amira whispered, her eyes bright with a mix of excitement and concern. She led Nia to a computer in the back corner, partially hidden by a tall filing cabinet. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she logged in through what looked like a backdoor system. "What am I looking at?" Nia asked, leaning closer to the screen. "SRBM," Amira said, pointing to the header at the top of the interface. "Student Risk Behavior Monitor. The school started using it last year as a pilot program. It's supposed to help teachers and staff identify at-risk students before they cause problems." She made air quotes around the words, "at risk." Nia's eyes narrowed as she studied the screen. The interface was clean and professional-looking, with charts, graphs, and lists of student names. Each name had colored dots next to it, green, yellow, and red. "How did you even find this?" Nia asked. Amira shrugged, a small smile playing at her lips. "Let's just say their network security needs work. But look at this." She clicked through several screens, pulling up what looked like behavior logs. "The system tracks everything. Every time a student goes to the bathroom, talks in the hallway, or meets with friends between classes." They began printing logs, page after page of data. Nia spread them out on the desk, her stomach tightening as she began to see patterns emerge. The system flagged students for increasingly vague infractions: excessive bathroom usage, elevated hallway volume, unauthorized social groups. "Wait," Nia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She started sorting the papers by student names, creating piles. "Amira, look at this." Together, they examined the flagged students. Marcus was there, tagged for persistent questioning of authority when he'd asked for clarification during class. Jasmine Rodriguez had multiple flags for disruptive social behavior. She'd been helping ESL students with their homework during study hall. David Washington had been marked for suspicious movement patterns, for taking the long way to class to avoid his ex-girlfriend. "Almost every flagged student is Black or Latinx," Nia said, her hands shaking slightly as she held up the papers. "The system is targeting us." Amira nodded grimly and clicked through to another screen. But here's where it gets worse. Look at the tag contributors. A list of teacher IDs appeared, each with a percentage next to it showing how many behavior tags they'd created. One username stood out immediately: T.E. Ellison. Next to it was the number, 45%. "She's teaching the AI," Nia said, her voice hollow. Every time she flags a student of color for some made-up violation, she's training the system to see us as threats. Amira pulled up more detailed logs of Ellison's tags. The pattern was clear. She consistently marked students of color for behaviors that white students exhibited without consequence. Argumentative tone for asking questions. Suspicious grouping for studying together. Non-compliant posture for looking tired in class. The system isn't just biased, Amira said, her voice tight with anger. It's being deliberately trained to discriminate, and once it's in the system, it looks objective, like it's just numbers and data, not racism. Nia sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This is bigger than just Ellison, she said slowly. The school bought this system. They implemented it. They're letting her use it this way. She paused, looking at the wall of evidence they'd created in her bedroom the night before. We can't just expose her. We need to show how the whole system protects people like her. Amira nodded, already pulling a USB drive from her backpack. We need to save everything, every log, every tag, every pattern. She began downloading files, her eyes constantly darting to the lab door. Nia gathered the printed papers, carefully folding them and sliding them into her notebook. Each page felt heavy with the weight of what they'd discovered, not just individual acts of racism, but a systematic attempt to encode bias into the school's very infrastructure. Done, Amira said, ejecting the USB drive. She handed it to Nia, who tucked it securely into an inner pocket of her backpack. Now let me just clean up our tracks. Nia watched as Amira's fingers flew across the keyboard again, erasing their digital footprints. The access logs disappeared, replaced with routine system maintenance records. To anyone checking, it would look like nothing more than a regular security update. Just in case, Amira said quietly, logging out and clearing the browser history. We can't be too careful. They gathered their things quickly, conscious of the lunch period drawing to a close. The freshman with headphones was still absorbed in his game, completely unaware of what had just been uncovered mere feet away from him. As they left the computer lab, Nia felt the USB drive pressing against her through her backpack, a small piece of plastic and metal that contained proof of something insidious. The school hadn't just hired a racist teacher, they'd given her tools to systematize her bias, to hide it behind algorithms and data points, to make discrimination look like objective fact. The hallway was starting to fill with students returning from lunch. Nia watched them pass, the easy way some moved through the space, the careful way others did. She wondered how many of them had been flagged, marked, tagged as risks, simply for existing in their own skin. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Before they parted ways, Amira grabbed Nia's arm. Be careful with that drive, she said, her eyes serious. What's on it? It could change everything. Nia nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. They had the evidence now, not just of Ellison's actions, but of the system that enabled and protected her. The question was no longer about what was happening, but about how to make everyone else see it too. The morning sun filtered through the metal slats of Nia's locker as she opened it to grab her history textbook. A small piece of paper fluttered to the ground, folded neatly in quarters. Nia picked it up, glancing around the crowded hallway before unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was precise and measured clearly from an adult. You're right. Meet me in room 204. Don't tell anyone. Nia's heart quickened, but she kept her face neutral as she tucked the note into her pocket. She'd learned long ago not to let her reactions show, especially at school. Throughout her classes that day, the note felt like it was burning through her pocket, demanding attention. After the final bell rang, Nia texted Amira that she'd be late meeting up, then made her way to room 204. It was in the older wing of the building, where most of the English classes were held. The hallway was quieter here, the afternoon light casting long shadows through the tall windows. She paused outside the door, taking a deep breath. Through the narrow window, she could see someone inside, Mr. Graves, the English teacher who'd been at Langston Prep longer than anyone could remember. He was known for keeping to himself, for staying carefully neutral in every situation. Some students called him a ghost, present, but never really there. Nia slipped her phone from her pocket and pressed record, sliding it back in with the microphone exposed. Then she opened the door. Mr. Graves looked up from his desk, his face lined with what looked like exhaustion, or maybe guilt. "Miss Jackson," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." The room smelled of old books and chalk dust. Decades of English lessons were written into its walls, countless discussions of literature and life that had never quite translated into real-world courage. Until now, perhaps. "Why did you want to see me?" Nia asked, remaining near the door. Mr. Graves gestured to a chair, but Nia stayed standing. He nodded, as if he'd expected this. "I've been watching you," he said. "Not just recently, for years. The way you observe, the way you document, the way you refuse to break." He stood and walked to the window, his shoulders heavy with something unspoken. "And I've been watching Ms. Ellison too, for much longer than I should have without speaking up." Nia's fingers pressed against her phone through her pocket, making sure it was still recording. "What do you mean?" "There's a group," Mr. Graves said, turning back to face her. "They don't have an official name, but they call themselves the Good Order Club. Teachers who meet privately, sharing notes about students they consider problematic." His voice caught slightly on the last word. "I used to hear about their meetings, dismissed it as teacher gossip, convinced myself it wasn't my business." He pulled open his desk drawer and took out a folder. "Until last year when I saw this," he handed Nia a paper that had been folded and unfolded many times. It was a list of names, 20 in total. 18 of them were black students. "They call it a watch list," Mr. Graves said. "Students who need extra attention, who require special monitoring. The euphemisms change, but the intent doesn't." Nia studied the list, recognizing many of the names. Some had transferred. Others had been suspended or expelled. A few had simply disappeared from the school system entirely. "Ms. Ellison is well protected," Mr. Graves continued. "She has connections on the school board, relationships with influential parents. She knows how to make everything look proper on paper." He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. "And people like me, we've helped her by staying silent." "Why are you telling me this now?" Nia asked, her voice steady despite the anger and validation churning inside her. Mr. Graves looked at her directly for the first time since she'd entered the room. "Because you're not waiting for anyone else to fix it," he said. "And that terrifies them." He reached into his desk again and pulled out a photograph. "This is from 2019, the original watch list meeting. I took it without them knowing." He handed it to Nia. "Use it however you need to." The photo showed a group of teachers gathered around a conference table. Ms. Ellison was at the head, pointing to something on a whiteboard. The image was slightly blurry, taken from an angle, but clear enough to be damning. "Why didn't you come forward before?" Nia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Fear," Mr. Graves said simply. "Fear of confrontation, fear of being wrong, fear of losing my job." He smiled sadly. "But watching you these past weeks, your courage made my fear feel shameful." Nia carefully placed the photo in her notebook. "Thank you," she said, not offering forgiveness, but acknowledging the risk he was taking now. "Be careful," Mr. Graves warned. "They'll try to discredit you, make you doubt yourself. They're very good at making their targets feel isolated." "I'm not alone," Nia said firmly, thinking of Amira, of her father, of all the students who'd shared their stories. Mr. Graves nodded. "No, you're not, and neither were the others. We just failed to stand with them." The late afternoon sun cast orange light across the classroom as Nia left, the photo secure in her notebook, the recorded conversation safely captured on her phone. That evening, in her bedroom, she added the photo to her evidence wall. It joined the complaint logs, the system data, the student testimonies, each piece a thread in the web of institutional racism they were uncovering. The photo seemed to stare back at her, the teachers' faces frozen in a moment of casual conspiracy. Nia pinned it carefully, making sure it was secure. Another nail in the system that had tried to nail so many others down. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Nia's bedroom as she set up her laptop for the video call. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced with anticipation. Kennedy Carter's profile picture appeared on the screen. A confident young woman with box braids and warm brown eyes, studying political science at Howard University. When the connection went through, Kennedy's face filled the screen. Her expression was guarded, skeptical. "So you're the one asking about my brother," she said, not quite a question. "Yes," Nia replied, keeping her voice calm and professional. "Thank you for agreeing to talk with me." Kennedy leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Look, we put that whole thing behind us. Elijah doesn't like talking about it, and I don't blame him. What makes you think digging this up will help anyone?" Instead of arguing, Nia shared her screen. "I want to show you something first." She pulled up the risk monitor data, the endless rows of flagged behaviors, and the stark racial patterns they revealed. Kennedy's expression shifted as she took in the numbers. "This is from your school now?" Kennedy asked, leaning closer to her screen. "Yes, and there's more." Nia switched to the 2019 watch list photo. "Do you recognize anyone in this picture?" Kennedy's eyes widened. "That's her. That's Ms. Ellison." Her voice had lost its defensive edge, replaced by something harder. "She's still teaching? After what she did to Elijah?" "She's doing the same things here," Nia explained. "Different methods, same patterns. The phone they accused me of stealing? They claimed they found it in a locker registered to a black student who'd transferred weeks ago." Kennedy was silent for a long moment, processing. Then she reached for her phone. "I need to show you something," she said. "Elijah left this voicemail the day after they expelled him. I saved it because, I don't know, maybe I knew someday someone would need to hear it." She pressed play and held the phone to her computer's microphone. Elijah's voice came through, young and broken. "I didn't take anything, but I know who told them I did. She said I scared her. I barely even talked to her." Nia felt her throat tighten. The pain in his voice was raw, unhealed. "He was 15, Kennedy said quietly. "Honor roll student. Had plans for college, engineering maybe. After this?" She shook her head. "He couldn't face going back to any school. Got his GED eventually, but..." She trailed off, looking away from the camera. "He works at Target now, night shift stock manager. He's good at it, but it's not what he wanted, not what he could have been." "I'm sorry," Nia said, meaning it deeply. "Don't be sorry," Kennedy replied, her voice stronger now. "Be effective. What are you planning to do with all this?" "We're gathering evidence, building a case, not just about individual incidents, but about the whole system that lets teachers like Ms. Ellison keep doing this." Kennedy nodded slowly. "You have my permission to use Elijah's story. His transcript, the voicemail, everything. I'll send you his school photo too, the one from before." She paused, then added, "Just, when you use it, make sure people understand. This isn't just about rules or policies. This is about dreams they kill, futures they steal." After the call ended, Nia sat in silence for several minutes, letting Kennedy's words sink in. Then she stood and walked to her evidence wall. She carefully pinned up Elijah's freshman year photo, a bright-eyed boy with a gentle smile full of possibility. Next to it, she placed his transcript, marked with the stark, expelled stamp that had derailed his life. The wall had become more than just a collection of evidence. It was a memorial to interrupted dreams, to futures diverted or destroyed. Each name, each face, each story represented someone who had been marked as threatening simply for existing in their own skin. Nia sank onto her bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of it all. The data was important, the risk monitor logs, the watch lists, the pattern of incidents. But what hit hardest was the human cost. Elijah stocking shelves instead of building bridges. Marcus afraid to raise his hand in class. Countless others who had learned to make themselves small, to speak softly, to accept unfair treatment as normal. Her phone buzzed with a message from Amira. "We need to go bigger." "I've got an idea." Nia looked at her evidence wall one more time, at Elijah's hopeful smile frozen in time, then typed back, "Tomorrow." She sat there in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the proof of systematic destruction, knowing that tomorrow would bring another step in their fight. But for now, she let herself feel the full impact of what they were uncovering. Not just policies and prejudices, but shattered dreams and stolen possibilities. The human wreckage that Ms. Ellison and others like her left in their wake. The room grew darker, but Nia didn't turn on the lights. She sat with the weight of these stories, these lives, these interrupted futures. Tomorrow would be about action. Tonight was for remembering why they were fighting in the first place. The morning sun filtered through the library windows as Nia approached the computer lab, her student ID card in hand. She swiped it against the electronic reader, expecting the familiar green light and click. Instead, a harsh red flash greeted her. She tried again. Red. One more time. Still red. A knot formed in her stomach. She'd used this card yesterday without issue. Something had changed overnight. Adjusting her backpack, Nia walked to the library instead. The old desktop computers there were slower, but they still worked with basic student logins. She chose a station in the corner, partially hidden behind a tall bookshelf, and entered her credentials. The Risk Monitor dashboard loaded slowly. Nia's fingers drummed against the desk as she navigated through the familiar interface. When she reached the student watch list, her breath caught. There, at the top of the screen, was her own name. A bright red flag pulsed next to her profile picture. Below it, clinical text spelled out her supposed threats. Behavior escalation. Defiance pattern forming. Suggested monitoring. High. Nia's hands clenched into fists. The system was supposed to predict risky behavior, but this wasn't prediction. It was retaliation. Someone had marked her as a threat for daring to question their methods. She printed the page quickly, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her notebook. The librarian glanced her way, but Nia kept her expression neutral as she gathered her things. Years of practice had taught her how to wear a mask of calm, even when her mind was racing. During third period, Nia requested a pass to see the assistant principal, Mr. Chen. She found him in his office, typing at his computer with the distracted air of someone who preferred paperwork to people. "Mr. Chen," Nia said, standing in his doorway, "I need to discuss my risk monitor status." He looked up, adjusting his glasses. "Ah, yes. The system flagged some concerning patterns in your behavior recently." "Concerning patterns?" Nia pulled out the printed page. "The only pattern here is that I started asking questions about how this system targets specific students." "The algorithm is neutral, Ms. Jackson," Mr. Chen said, his tone dismissive. "It simply processes data points and identifies potential issues. There's no targeting involved." Movement in the hallway caught Nia's attention. Through the office window, she spotted Ms. Ellison standing near the water fountain, pretending to check her phone. But her posture was too stiff, her attention too focused on Nia's direction. "An algorithm is only as neutral as the people programming it," Nia replied, turning back to Mr. Chen. "And the people feeding it data." Mr. Chen's expression hardened. "I suggest you focus on your studies and leave the administrative concerns to us professionals. Your recent interest in school policies could be interpreted as disruptive." "Interpreted by whom?" Nia asked quietly. "The algorithm or Ms. Ellison?" Mr. Chen stood up. "That will be all, Ms. Jackson. Return to class." In the hallway, Ms. Ellison was gone, but Nia could feel the weight of surveillance around her. The security cameras seemed to track her movement. Even other teachers watched her pass with new wariness. During lunch, Amira found Nia in their usual spot behind the library. Her friend's face was tight with concern. "The system updated at 2 a.m. last night," Amira whispered, showing Nia her phone. "I set up alerts to track changes. Someone logged in and manually adjusted your risk score. They're watching every move you make now." Nia nodded, unsurprised but still angry. "They're trying to scare me off." "They're trying to discredit you," Amira corrected. "If you're labeled as a problem student, who's going to believe what you say about the system?" That evening, Nia found her father in his home office, surrounded by legal briefs and coffee cups. He looked up when she knocked, his expression softening slightly. "Dad," she said, "I need to show you something." Jeremiah set down his papers. What's wrong? Instead of answering directly, Nia laid out her evidence on his desk. The risk monitor data, the watch lists, Kennedy's statement about Elijah, and finally, her own flagged profile from that morning. Jeremiah's face darkened as he examined each piece. His hands trembled slightly when he read about Elijah Carter's expulsion. By the time he saw Nia's risk assessment, his jaw was clenched tight. I'll end them, he said, reaching for his phone. First thing tomorrow, I'm calling the school board, then the Department of Education. This ends now. No, Nia said firmly, placing her hand over his phone. Not yet. I'm not done. Jeremiah stared at her. Nia, they're actively targeting you now. This isn't just about exposing their system anymore. They're trying to build a case against you. I know, she replied. But if we shut it down now, they'll just hide the evidence and start over somewhere else. We need to prove the whole pattern, not just individual cases. They won't just watch you now, Jeremiah warned, his voice heavy with concern. They'll come for you. They'll try to break you. Nia met his gaze steadily. Let them try. Jeremiah studied his daughter's face. The quiet determination, the unflinching resolve. Slowly, he lowered his phone. 2 days, he said. You have 2 days to gather whatever else you need. Then I'm stepping in, whether you're ready or not. Nia nodded. That's all I need. She gathered her evidence, tucking each piece carefully back into her folder. As she turned to leave, Jeremiah called after her. Nia? She paused in the doorway. I'm proud of you, but please, be careful. I will, she promised, knowing that careful wasn't enough anymore. They were past the point of caution now. The system had declared war, and Nia was ready to fight back. The Friday morning hallways buzzed with a different kind of energy. As Nia walked to her first class, she noticed the shift in how students watched her. Gone were the dismissive glances and mocking whispers. Instead, curious eyes followed her movement, heads bent together in quiet speculation rather than judgment. In AP Literature, Mrs. Bennett called on every raised hand except Nia's, her gaze skipping over her section of the classroom as if there was an invisible wall between them. The discussion about symbolism in The Scarlet Letter felt heavy with irony, a conversation about social ostracism while actively demonstrating it. 2 periods later, Mr. Rodriguez did the opposite in world history. His voice boomed with artificial enthusiasm whenever Nia spoke, his praise excessive and strained. Excellent point about civil disobedience, Ms. Jackson. Very insightful. Each comment made her sink lower in her seat, aware of how his overcompensation highlighted the tension. The whispers followed her to lunch. Nia sat at her usual table, picking at a sandwich she couldn't taste. The cafeteria's fluorescent lights seemed harsher today, every movement in her peripheral vision making her slightly more alert. A shadow fell across her table. Nia looked up to see Tasha Reed standing there, her expression carefully neutral. Tasha was a sophomore who'd always kept to herself, another quiet black student who'd learned to navigate the system by staying invisible. They'd never really talked before. Without making eye contact, Tasha slid a small flash drive across the table. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You didn't get this from me. Before Nia could respond, Tasha was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd of students with practiced ease. Nia slipped the drive into her pocket, her heart beating faster. Whatever was on it, Tasha had risked something to share it. After school, in the safety of her bedroom, Nia plugged the drive into her laptop. A folder opened, revealing dozens of email screenshots, messages forwarded from the school's internal system. Nia's hands trembled slightly as she began to read. The emails were part of a thread between several teachers, spanning the last 2 weeks. Most were careful with their language, using coded terms and vague references. But Ms. Ellison's messages stood out with their barely contained hostility. One email from yesterday made Nia's blood run cold. She's dangerous. We need to escalate this. She's already poisoned Graves. The longer we wait, the more damage she'll do. This isn't just about one student anymore. She's threatening the entire system we've built. Another teacher, whose name Nia didn't recognize, had replied, Agreed. Suggest preemptive discipline before the showcase event. Can't risk her using that platform. Nia sat back, her mind racing. The spring showcase. Of course. It was the school's biggest event of the year. When parents, board members, and local media gathered to celebrate student achievements, she'd been planning to use that moment to reveal everything she'd discovered. Somehow they knew. She grabbed her phone to text Amira, then stopped. If they were watching her closely enough to guess her showcase plans, they might be monitoring her communications too. She sent a casual message instead. Want to get some fresh air? Park in 30 degrees? Amira's reply came quickly. Sure. No phones? No phones, Nia confirmed. The local park was busy with after-school activities. Perfect cover for a private conversation. Nia found Amira by their usual bench, far from the playground and basketball courts. They walked along the tree-lined path, speaking softly. Project Echo, Amira said after Nia showed her the printed emails. That's what we should call it, because everything they've done is about to echo back to them. Nia nodded. We need to lay out everything. Ellison's pattern at her old school, the AI system's racial bias, the watch list, the buried cases, the email threats. Show how deep it goes. I've been working on the presentation, Amira replied. Multiple backups, offline copies. They can't delete what they can't access, but we need to be ready for them to try something before the showcase. They found a quiet spot near the pond, where ducks paddled lazily across the water. The peaceful scene felt at odds with the weight of their discussion. The risk monitor data is the key, Amira continued. I've mapped out how the system weighs different behaviors. Black students get flagged for things white students do all the time, like gathering in groups or speaking too loudly. The AI isn't neutral. It's been taught to see us as threats. And Ellison's been feeding it, Nia added. Almost half the behavior tags come from her. She's training the system to perpetuate her bias. They spent the next hour refining their strategy, mapping out every detail of Project Echo. The presentation would start with individual stories. Elijah Carter, Tasha Reed, others who'd been silenced. Then it would zoom out to show the pattern using data to prove what everyone felt but couldn't prove. The showcase is in 2 weeks, Amira said finally. We could probably launch sooner if… Not yet, Nia interrupted. One last move. What do you mean? Nia watched a duck glide across the pond, leaving ripples in its wake. Like echo waves, she thought, like consequences finally catching up. They're expecting us to either back down or rush in, she explained. We need to be smarter. There's one more piece we need, something they won't see coming. Monday morning arrived with a heavy stillness in the air. The hallways of Langston Prep felt different, charged with an energy that made even casual conversations feel weighted. Nia sat in her first period class, sketching abstract patterns in her notebook when the intercom crackled. Nia Jackson to the principal's office immediately. She gathered her things slowly, deliberately. A few students watched her walk out, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. She'd been expecting this, had known it was coming since she discovered the emails. Still, her heart beat a little faster as she approached the administrative wing. Principal Warner sat behind his massive desk, hands folded in front of him. Vice Principal Chen stood by the window, arms crossed. The school's IT coordinator, Mr. Peterson, occupied a chair in the corner, looking uncomfortable. Please sit down, Ms. Jackson, Warner said, gesturing to the chair across from him. His voice carried a false warmth that made Nia's skin crawl. She sat back straight, hands folded in her lap, mirroring his pose. The silence stretched for a moment before he spoke again. We've received some concerning reports, Warner began, sliding a printed document across his desk. Our system logs show unauthorized access to private staff files, files that contain sensitive information. Nia glanced at the paper. It was one of the risk monitor reports she'd seen, the one showing the racial disparity in behavior flags. Her expression remained neutral. That's a serious accusation, she said quietly. Warner's smile tightened. It's not an accusation, Ms. Jackson. We have proof. The access came from your student login credentials. Interesting, Nia replied, considering I haven't been able to log into the computer lab for days. My access was revoked last week. Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Vice Principal Chen's frown deepened. Nevertheless, Warner continued, we have evidence of multiple violations: accessing private files, distributing confidential information, attempting to undermine school security systems. He leaned forward. These are expulsion-level offenses, Ms. Jackson. Nia met his gaze steadily. Is that a threat, Principal Warner? It's a reality check, he snapped, his fake warmth evaporating. You're a bright student, Nia, but you're playing a dangerous game, one that could have serious consequences for your future. Like the consequences for Elijah Carter? Nia asked softly. Warner's face flushed. Mr. Peterson stood abruptly, mumbling something about another meeting before hurrying out. Vice Principal Chen stepped closer to the desk. That case is sealed, Chen said sharply. A lot of things are sealed, Nia replied. That doesn't make them right. Warner's jaw clenched. You have until the end of the day to turn over any school documents in your possession. We'll be conducting a thorough investigation. Until then, return to class. Nia stood, smoothing her skirt. Is that all? For now, Warner said, the threat clear in his voice. The hallways were empty as Nia walked to her locker. When she turned the combination and pulled the door open, her stomach dropped. Everything was gone. Her books, her spare notebook, even the small mirror she'd stuck to the inside of the door. Only a few scraps of paper remained at the bottom. The bell rang and students poured into the hallway. The whispers started immediately. Some students hurried past, avoiding eye contact. Others stared openly, phones partially hidden as they typed messages. A few, mostly other black and brown students, gave her subtle nods of support. They're trying to scare you, Amira whispered as they passed each other. Don't let them. Throughout the day, the tension grew. Teachers either ignored Nia completely or watched her with obvious suspicion. During lunch, she noticed several staff members huddled near the cafeteria entrance, speaking in hushed tones and glancing her way. At 2:15, an announcement came over the intercom. Attention faculty. Emergency staff meeting in the library immediately after dismissal. Attendance is mandatory. Minutes later, Nia's phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Graves. They're moving. She deleted the message immediately and continued taking notes as if nothing had changed. Inside, her mind was racing, calculating moves and counter-moves. The pieces were falling exactly where she'd expected them to. When the final bell rang, Nia packed her bag carefully. She walked to her empty locker one last time, running her fingers along the metal edge. Behind her, she could hear teachers hurrying toward the library, their footsteps echoing with urgency. Vice Principal Chen found her before she reached the front doors. Ms. Jackson, please wait in the conference room. The next 30 minutes passed slowly. Nia sat quietly, watching the clock tick while muffled voices carried from the library down the hall. Finally, Principal Warner entered, followed by Chen and 3 other administrators. He held a thick manila envelope. Effective immediately, he announced, you are suspended pending investigation into multiple violations of school policy and ethical conduct guidelines. He placed the envelope on the table. Your parents have been notified. You are not to return to campus or contact any staff members until further notice. Nia nodded once, picked up the envelope without opening it, and stood. Through the conference room windows, she could see her father's black SUV pulling into the parking lot. Jeremiah Jackson's rage was palpable as he strode into the building. His suit was impeccable as always, but his eyes blazed with barely contained fury. Principal Warner took an involuntary step back. Mr. Jackson, he started, we can discuss. You'll be hearing from our attorneys, Jeremiah cut him off. His voice was quiet, but carried the weight of his full authority. Every document, every email, every security log. If a single file is deleted or altered, I will personally ensure this ends your career. Are we clear? Warner's face had gone pale. He nodded stiffly. The ride home was silent. Jeremiah's hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, his jaw clenched. Nia stared out the window, watching the familiar streets pass by. She could feel her father's anger radiating through the car, but she waited. When they pulled into their driveway, Jeremiah turned off the engine but didn't move. "I'm ending this," he said. "Tonight. One phone call, Dash." "Dad?" Nia interrupted quietly. "Come inside first." She led him to her bedroom, where her evidence wall had grown to cover nearly 2 full sides of the room. Photos, printouts, timelines, and connection threads created a massive web of documentation. In the center was a small table where her laptop sat, connected to an external hard drive. Nia picked up the flash drive Tasha had given her and held it up. "We're uploading everything," she said calmly. "This weekend." The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Amira's garage, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. 4 laptops hummed in unison, their screens casting a blue glow on the determined faces gathered around a folding table. Nia sat at the head, her evidence binder spread open before her. To her right, Amira's fingers flew across her keyboard, lines of code reflecting in her glasses. Tasha sat quietly opposite her, organizing image files with methodical precision. Malik leaned against the wall, his usual energy contained but visible in the way he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Okay," Nia said, her voice steady as she laid out a printed timeline. "The spring showcase starts at 7 p.m. sharp. Principal Warner always speaks for exactly 5 minutes. Same speech every year. At 7:05, when he introduces the first student presentation, we go live." Amira nodded without looking up from her screen. "I've got the broadcast override nearly finished. It'll hijack every screen in the auditorium simultaneously. Main projector, side displays, even the lobby monitors. They'll try to shut it down," Tasha pointed out, her voice soft but certain. She'd been expelled just 2 days after giving Nia the flash drive, officially for repeated dress code violations. The real reason hung unspoken between them. "That's why we're running it through 3 separate systems," Amira explained. "Even if they kill one feed, the others keep going. They'd have to shut down the entire school's power grid to stop it completely." Malik pushed off from the wall and approached the table. "I've got 20 flash drives ready to go." He pulled one from his pocket, small, black, unmarked. "Soon as the doors open, I'll make sure they get to the right people. Parents who've complained before, teachers who might be sympathetic, school board members who actually show up. Just remember," Nia cautioned, "no direct handoffs. We can't risk anyone connecting them to us before it starts." "Please," Malik scoffed, but his smile was grim. "They expelled me for disrupting class culture. Trust me, I know how to move without being seen." Tasha turned her laptop around, showing a series of cleanly designed slides. "I've organized the evidence chronologically. Started with your arrest footage. That gets attention right away. Then we move through the risk monitor data, the racial disparity charts, and the connection to previous cases." She clicked through a few screens. "I've highlighted the key points in red. Even if someone only watches for 30 seconds, they'll get the message." Nia nodded approvingly. "Perfect. Amira, how long can we hold the feed?" 8 minutes maximum before their IT team might break through, but we only need 6. Amira finally looked up, her expression fierce. 6 minutes to blow their whole system apart. "Then let's record the voiceover," Nia said, pulling a high-quality microphone from her bag. The others watched as she set it up, adjusting the levels with careful precision. She'd practiced these words countless times in her head, but speaking them now made them real. She took a deep breath, pressed record, and began, "My name is Nia Jackson. You watched me get arrested, but you didn't see what came after." Her voice was steady, controlled, not angry, but determined. She spoke about the pattern of targeting Black students, about the AI system trained on racial bias, about teachers who used fear as a weapon, and administrators who buried the truth. She named names, cited dates, referenced specific incidents that could be verified. "This isn't about me," she continued, her words clear and measured. "This is about every student who was pushed out, labeled as disruptive, or made to feel unwelcome in their own school. This is about a system that doesn't just allow discrimination, it automates it." When she finished, the garage was silent except for the soft whir of laptop fans. Amira worked quickly, syncing the audio with Tasha's visuals, while Malik arranged the flash drives in neat rows. "Ready for the test run?" Amira asked, her finger hovering over the enter key. They gathered close, watching as the presentation began to play. The footage of Nia's arrest came first, shaky cell phone video showing her being handcuffed in front of her classmates. The image dissolved into a series of data visualizations, pie charts showing racial disparities in discipline, bar graphs of risk scores broken down by ethnicity, actual screenshots from the risk monitor system. Mr. Graves's recorded confession played over footage of empty hallways and closed office doors. The Good Order Club meets every month. They keep lists. They watch certain students. They wait for any excuse. Kennedy Carter's voice followed, telling her brother Elijah's story. His transcript appeared on screen showing straight A's until the day of his expulsion. Then came the email threads, the buried complaints, the pattern of transfers and cover-ups stretching back years. Finally, Nia's voice returned, calm and clear. This ends now. Not because I'm asking for change, but because we're demanding it. With evidence, with data, with truth. The screen faded to black. No one spoke for several long moments. Damn, Malik whispered finally, breaking the silence. Tasha wiped quickly at her eyes. It's perfect. Amira was already typing again, making small adjustments. The timing is exact. 6 minutes and 20 seconds total. If we hit play at 7:05, no earlier, Nia said firmly. No later, 7:05 exactly. She looked at each of them in turn, her team, her allies, her friends. Everyone knows their roles? They nodded. Malik patted the flash drives. Tasha held up her folder of backup files. Amira showed the final code sequence. Then we meet here Monday at 6 p.m., Nia said. The showcase starts at 7 o'clock. At 7:05. She let the sentence hang. We tell the truth, Amira finished. All of it, Malik added. Together, Tasha said quietly. They began packing up their equipment, each lost in their own thoughts about what Monday would bring. The morning sun had risen higher now, eliminating the shadows in the garage. In the bright light, their plan felt more real than ever. Not just data and code and careful timing, but a promise of change that couldn't be undone. The Sunday evening sky had darkened to a deep purple when Jeremiah's phone rang. He was in his home office, reviewing case files, while Nia worked quietly in her room down the hall. The caller ID showed Margaret Whitman, school board chair. His jaw tightened as he answered. Jeremiah. Margaret's voice was clipped, formal. I apologize for calling on a Sunday, but we've received some disturbing information regarding your daughter. Jeremiah's hand gripped the phone tighter. What kind of information, Margaret? An anonymous source has provided evidence suggesting Nia has been accessing private school systems without authorization. Hacking, to be specific. There was a pause. Given the severity of these allegations, we're considering pressing formal charges. The room seemed to grow colder. Jeremiah's voice remained measured, controlled, the voice he used in court. What evidence? I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics, but… No, Margaret, Jeremiah cut her off. You call me on a Sunday evening, threaten my 14-year-old daughter with criminal charges, and claim you can't provide specifics? He stood, pacing behind his desk. You're a lawyer, I'm the Attorney General. We both know that's not how this works. Margaret's tone grew defensive. The source is credible. Show me the evidence, Jeremiah demanded. Show me logs, timestamps, access records. Show me something concrete that proves these allegations. The silence on the other end stretched out. That's what I thought, Jeremiah said quietly. You have nothing. Jeremiah, please, we're trying to handle this diplomatically. No, you're trying to intimidate a child because you're afraid of what she knows. His voice was steel now. Don't call this number again without evidence and your legal team present. Good night, Margaret. He ended the call and stood in the silence of his office, mind racing. They were getting desperate, which meant Nia was onto something big. His phone buzzed again, a text from Nia. Dad, we need to talk. Before he could respond, raised voices echoed from down the hall. He found Nia in her room, hunched over her laptop with Amira on video chat. The usually confident girl looked pale, her voice shaking. It's gone, Amira was saying. Everything on the backup server, all the risk monitor data, the email threads, the complaint records. Someone got in and corrupted all the files. Nia's fingers flew across her keyboard. When? Just now. I was doing one last check before tomorrow and… Amira's voice caught. It's like they knew exactly where to look. Call the others, Nia said. Emergency meeting, now. 30 minutes later, they gathered in Amira's garage again. The energy was different from yesterday. Tense, electric with fear and anger. Malik arrived last, his usual easy demeanor replaced with something harder. They searched my locker today, he announced without preamble. At the new school. No warning, no explanation. Just pulled me out of Sunday basketball practice and tore through everything. Tasha wrapped her arms around herself. They're trying to scare us off. They're trying to stop us before tomorrow, Amira corrected, still working frantically at her laptop. I can't recover any of it. The corruption is too thorough. Professional job. But we still have the master copy, Nia said quietly. She pulled out a small black USB drive, unremarkable looking but containing everything they'd gathered. Months of evidence, testimonies, data trails, their entire case against the system. Everyone stared at it. One small device that could change everything or destroy their chances if it fell into the wrong hands. We should make more copies, Tasha suggested. Too risky, Amira shook her head. They're watching all our digital moves now. Any upload, any transfer, they'll see it. So what do we do? Malik asked. Push back the launch? Nia stood, her voice firm. Number, let them come. We're not deleting anything. She pulled a small velvet pouch from her bag, the kind used for jewelry. They can't stop what's already in place. Understanding dawned on Amira's face. The podium. Nia nodded. Warner always uses the same one. Never moves it. Perfect hiding spot until tomorrow. How do we get in? Tasha asked. They've probably changed all the codes by now. They did, Amira confirmed, but they forgot about the roof access. The AV room has a maintenance hatch that's only secured with a physical lock. She grinned. And I happen to be very good with locks. Jeremiah, who had been listening silently, stepped forward. Nia. Dad, she cut him off gently. I know about the call from Margaret. They're scared, which means we're right. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her. Gone was the quiet girl who sketched atoms with faces. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had found her voice in the midst of injustice. He nodded once. Be careful. An hour later, Nia and Amira stood on the dark roof of Langston Prep. The night air was cool, and the campus below was silent, except for the distant hum of security lights. Amira worked quickly with her lockpicks while Nia kept watch. Got it, Amira whispered. The hatch opened with a soft click. They descended carefully into the AV room, using their phones for light. The room was cramped, filled with equipment and cables. Through the window, they could see the auditorium below. Rows of empty seats facing the stage where tomorrow's showcase would take place. There, Nia pointed to the podium. It stood solid and wooden at center stage, waiting for tomorrow's speeches. They made their way down, moving silently through the shadows. Nia knelt beside the podium while Amira watched the doors. With careful fingers, Nia secured the velvet pouch underneath the wooden panel, using strong tape to hold it in place. Anyone speaking tomorrow would stand inches from it, never knowing. Done, she breathed. They retraced their steps, leaving everything exactly as they'd found it. Back on the roof, Amira reset the lock while Nia took one last look at the school, the place that had tried to break her, and instead had made her stronger. You okay? Amira asked as they walked home through the quiet streets. Yeah, Nia said. And she was. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, she had placed truth where lies usually stood. The rest was up to the system itself, to reveal its own corruption through its desperate attempts to maintain control. The master copy waited in its hiding place, containing everything they needed. At 7:05 tomorrow evening, the truth would speak for itself. The spring showcase buzzed with nervous energy as students filed into Langston Prep's main building. Girls in formal dresses clutched presentation notes while boys tugged at unfamiliar ties. The usual teenage chatter filled the halls, but underneath ran a current of tension that few could name. Nia watched from the second-floor window as black cars pulled into the parking lot. News vans from local stations set up their equipment, invited by the administration to capture what they thought would be a celebration of student achievement. The superintendent's luxury sedan arrived, followed by school board members in their best suits. "They really went all out," Amira whispered, appearing beside her. She wore a dark blue dress, her laptop bag slung casually over her shoulder. Inside was the timer program, set to trigger exactly at 7:05 p.m. Nia nodded, smoothing her own cream-colored dress. They want to show everything's normal, that nothing's wrong at their perfect school. Down in the auditorium, Jeremiah Jackson slipped in through the side door, choosing a seat near the back where he could observe everything. He wore his usual power suit, but left his attorney general pin at home. Tonight, he was just a parent, though his presence alone caused several staff members to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The superintendent took the stage first, beaming at the packed house. "Welcome to Langston Prep's annual spring showcase. Tonight, we celebrate excellence." His voice droned on about test scores and college acceptances. In the wings, Ms. Ellison stood with other teachers, occasionally glancing at her phone. She'd been checking it obsessively all day, as if waiting for confirmation that some threat had been neutralized. But Naya and her team had gone silent. Their digital footprint disappeared completely after last night. Parents filled the rows, programs rustling as they settled in, local news cameras set up in the back, their red lights blinking. The school had promoted this heavily, their chance to show off their prestigious program and diverse student achievement. At 7:04 p.m., Amira's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard one last time, hidden in the AV booth. The program was armed. Nia sat with other students, her heart steady, despite everything riding on the next few minutes. Malik and Tasha were scattered throughout the audience, flash drives already distributed to key parents and reporters. The superintendent finished his speech right on schedule. And now, please enjoy our student-led presentation on Langston's commitment to excellence and equality. The lights dimmed exactly at 7:05 p.m. The screen flickered to life, but instead of the planned slideshow, Naya's voice filled the auditorium, calm, clear, and impossible to ignore. "Before tonight, I was a file in their system, flagged, watched, framed." The footage of her arrest played in high definition. Security officers approaching her desk, the handcuffs, the confused faces of her classmates. Someone in the audience gasped. "But I wasn't the first," her voice continued. "And I wouldn't have been the last." The risk monitor data appeared next, page after page of coded bias, with Black and Latino students flagged at rates 5 times higher than their white peers. The algorithm's parameters flashed across the screen, revealing built-in prejudice masked as neutral metrics. Email threads between teachers populated the screen, including Ms. Ellison's messages about problem students and maintaining order. The Good Order Club's meeting minutes appeared, followed by audio recordings that echoed through the stunned audience. "We need to control the narrative before these kids get any ideas. The system works if we make it work. Some students just don't belong here." Parents began shifting in their seats. A school board member stood up, then sat back down, unsure what to do. The presentation continued relentlessly. Elijah Carter's case file appeared. The false accusation, the forced confession, the quiet settlement. His sister's testimony played next. They destroyed his future because they were afraid of him succeeding. Mr. Graves's whistleblower confession followed, his voice shaking but clear. "I watched it happen for years. I stayed silent. I was wrong." The final image filled the screen, the 2019 watch list with its damning racial breakdown. Below it, words appeared slowly. "You protected them. Now see what it cost us." The auditorium fell into complete silence. For several seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The truth hung in the air, too heavy to deny, too clear to dismiss. Then came the first gasp. A parent stood up, pulling their child with them. Whispers started, growing louder. A young teacher near the front walked out quickly, followed by another. Parents began rising from their seats, some angry, others shocked. Ms. Ellison stood frozen in the corner, her face drained of color. She took one step toward the exit, then another. But before she could reach the door, two figures stepped out of the shadows, federal investigators in dark suits, badges already out. "Ms. Ellen Ellison?" one asked, though it wasn't really a question. The other investigator spoke into his radio, voice clear and professional. "We've got her." The news cameras swung toward the scene, capturing everything. The superintendent rushed forward, but Jeremiah Jackson was faster, appearing seemingly from nowhere to block his path. Students watched wide-eyed as their teacher, who had wielded so much quiet power over their lives, was led away. Some filmed with their phones. Others just stared, processing the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. Through it all, Nia remained in her seat, watching as the system she'd fought so hard to expose finally began to crack. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. The truth had been her only goal, and now it was out there, impossible to hide or deny. The presentation continued to loop on the screen behind the chaos, a constant reminder of every student who had been silenced, every incident that had been buried, every life that had been altered by institutional bias masked as discipline. Parents demanded answers. Board members huddled in corners, whispering frantically. Reporters scribbled notes and made urgent phone calls. The carefully maintained facade of Langston Prep was crumbling in real time, broadcast live for the entire community to see. The video spread like wildfire across social media platforms that night. A parent from the showcase had uploaded the full presentation to multiple sites, and within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Local news stations picked up the story, their headlines growing bolder with each update. Systematic discrimination exposed at elite prep school, and student unveils years of institutional bias. Nia sat cross-legged on her bed, watching the view counter climb on her laptop screen. She hadn't posted anything herself. She didn't need to. The truth had its own momentum now. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from classmates and strangers alike, but she left them unanswered. In his home office down the hall, Jeremiah fielded calls from major news networks and fellow politicians. His response remained consistent. A brief, carefully worded statement from his office that simply read, "We will not obstruct the investigation." When pressed for interviews or additional comments, his staff declined politely but firmly. This wasn't about him or his position. It was about the students. Social media exploded with reactions. Former Langston Prep students began sharing their own stories in long threads, each one confirming patterns that Nia had uncovered. The Risk Monitor data sparked particular outrage, with tech experts and civil rights activists dissecting its biased algorithms in detailed posts. At midnight, Nia's phone lit up with a text from Amira. "We're trending nationally." She didn't reply, but smiled slightly as she closed her eyes to sleep. The next day brought waves of announcements. The school board called an emergency meeting, broadcast live on local television. Nia watched from her living room as board members, looking tired and defensive, announced a comprehensive audit of all disciplinary practices at Langston Prep. The superintendent, his usual confidence notably dimmed, read from a prepared statement about the immediate suspension of the Risk Monitor system contract. "In light of recent revelations," he said, his voice slightly strained, "we are conducting a thorough review of all student monitoring systems and disciplinary procedures. The safety and fair treatment of every student remains our highest priority." Minutes later, news broke that 2 more teachers had submitted their resignations. Both had been mentioned in the Good Order Club emails. Their departure felt less like a victory and more like an acknowledgement of a truth too heavy to carry. Around noon, an email arrived from Mr. Graves. Nia read it twice. "Your silence shook the loudest rooms. They never saw it coming because they were looking for anger, for outbursts, for something they could dismiss. Instead, you gave them facts they couldn't deny and truth they couldn't escape. You didn't just expose them. You showed us all how to be better. Thank you." She closed the email without responding. Mr. Graves had found his voice. He didn't need her acknowledgement. The afternoon brought another development. An acceptance letter from Roosevelt High, the local public school. It arrived by email, simple and straightforward. No special conditions, no extra scrutiny, just an open door to a new beginning. Nia allowed herself a small smile as she closed her laptop. She looked around her room, at the wall of evidence that had started everything. It wasn't needed anymore. The truth was out there now, spreading on its own. She pulled a cardboard box from her closet and began carefully packing her sketchbooks. Each one contained pieces of her journey, drawings from classes, margins filled with notes and observations, the quiet documentation of patterns others had tried to ignore. As she reached under her bed for an old sketchbook, a loose piece of paper fluttered to the floor. Picking it up, she recognized it immediately. A drawing she'd made the day before her arrest. It showed a series of interconnected gears, each one turning the next with small figures caught in the mechanism. She'd drawn it during Ms. Ellison's class, watching the system at work before she knew how to fight it. Nia folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into her backpack. New halls, she thought to herself. Same fight. The sound of incoming news alerts continued from her father's office, but they seemed distant now, like echoes from a storm that had already passed. The investigation would continue. Changes would come. But Nia's part in this chapter was complete. She returned to packing, methodically filling the box with years of artwork and observations. Each sketchbook represented not just her art, but her evolution. From a student who watched silently to one who had learned to fight with truth and patience. The afternoon light slanted through her window, casting long shadows across her partially packed room. Outside, news vans still lingered near their house, hoping for a statement from the Attorney General's daughter, who had exposed systemic racism with nothing but careful observation and quiet determination. But Nia had already said everything she needed to say. Her voice had been heard in the silence of hard evidence, in the undeniable weight of data and documentation. She had learned that sometimes the loudest statement was simply showing the truth, unadorned and uncompromising. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Amira with a link to yet another news story about Langston Prep. Nia left it unread. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at Roosevelt High, new halls to walk, new systems to understand. But for now, she continued packing, one sketchbook at a time, ready to carry her fight to wherever it needed to go next. 1 week after the Langston Prep scandal broke, Nia Jackson stood at the entrance of Dunbar High School, taking in the stark differences from her previous school. Gone were the sleek glass walls and polished floors. Instead, she faced a brick building with character etched into every worn step and weathered doorway. Students of all backgrounds streamed past her, their chatter and laughter echoing off the walls. The morning sun cast long shadows through the metal-framed windows, illuminating hallways filled with diverse faces. Black, Latino, Asian, and white students moved between classes, their conversations mixing into a vibrant hum that felt authentic in a way Langston never had. The walls displayed student artwork alongside faded motivational posters, telling stories of creativity surviving budget constraints. Nia adjusted her backpack, feeling the weight of her sketchbook inside. A security guard gave her a friendly nod as she passed through the main entrance. No metal detectors, no suspicious glances. The morning bell rang, its sound slightly tinny but somehow more welcoming than Langston's precise digital tones. Her new homeroom was room 212, where Ms. Thompson, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and practical shoes, waited at the door. The classroom showed signs of wear, scratched desks, mismatched chairs, and windows that had seen better days. But there was also life here. Student projects covered the walls, and small plants lined the windowsills. "Class," Ms. Thompson announced as Nia entered, her voice warm but matter-of-fact. "This is Nia Jackson." Make her feel at home. No special introductions, no loaded glances, no whispered comments. Just a simple welcome. Nia took an empty seat near the middle of the room, neither hiding nor drawing attention to herself. The girl next to her offered a casual smile before returning to her notebook. The boy in front wore a faded t-shirt with a science pun. Everyone seemed focused on their own worlds, letting her find her place naturally. Ms. Thompson launched into morning announcements, her voice carrying over the shuffle of papers and quiet conversations. The overhead lights flickered occasionally, a far cry from Langston's carefully maintained environment. But Nia noticed something else. Students spoke up without hesitation, asking questions and making comments without measuring every word. The morning passed in a blur of new faces and routines. Teachers introduced themselves without pretense, some clearly overworked but still engaged with their students. In chemistry, the equipment was older but the experiments were hands-on. In English, the discussion was lively and unrestrained. When lunch period arrived, Nia found her way to the cafeteria, a large, noisy space with long tables and windows that let in natural light. She chose a spot near the corner, pulling out her lunch and a small notebook. The familiar action of observing while remaining unobtrusive felt different here, more like gathering stories than documenting threats. A group of students approached her table, led by a girl with intricate braids and confident posture. They moved with purpose but without aggression, carrying their lunch trays and curious expressions. The girl with braids spoke first. "You're Nia Jackson, right?" she asked, her voice carrying a mix of admiration and curiosity. "That was you in the video?" Nia nodded, studying their faces. There was no hostility there, no judgment, just genuine interest and something that looked like hope. The girl broke into a wide grin. "I'm Jada, that video you made? You just gave us a playbook." She gestured to the empty seats. "Mind if we join?" Nia moved her things aside, making room. The group settled around her, Jada, 2 other girls, and a boy wearing a chess club t-shirt. They didn't crowd her or bombard her with questions. Instead, they began sharing their own stories, as if they'd been waiting for someone who would truly listen. Jada spoke about receiving dress code violations twice in 1 month for her braids, the same style she was wearing now. "They said it was distracting," she explained, rolling her eyes. "But when Katie wore colored extensions, nobody said a word." The boy in the chess club shirt, Marcus, described how guidance counselors steered him away from AP classes despite his high grades. "They said they were trying to protect my GPA," he said quietly. "But they don't say that to other students." Another girl, Sophie, talked about the metal detector searches that seemed to target certain students more than others. The stories flowed naturally, each one adding to a pattern that felt all too familiar to Nia. She listened more than she spoke, her pen moving steadily across her notebook pages. Each story was a piece of a larger picture, one that needed to be documented with the same care and precision she'd used at Langston. But this time it felt different. These weren't just data points, they were trusted stories, freely shared. That evening in her bedroom, Nia opened her laptop and created a new folder. She named it Quiet Board. Simple, unassuming, but purposeful. Inside, she started a spreadsheet, clean and organized, ready to hold the truth of another school's struggles. The first entries were straightforward. Jada B., dress code citation for braids 2 times this month. Marcus T., AP class discouragement despite 3.8 GPA. Sophie L., random security check, 3 times more frequent than peers. No dramatic headlines, no viral videos, just careful documentation of daily realities. Nia added notes about patterns she'd observed, potential data points to track, and questions to investigate further. This wasn't about creating another explosion of media attention. It was about building something sustainable, something that would grow quietly but inexorably. She worked methodically, organizing the information into categories: academic barriers, disciplinary disparities, resource allocation. Each entry was a small piece of truth, waiting to be connected to others. This wasn't a weapon to wield. It was a foundation to build upon. The familiar rhythm of documentation felt right, but different from her work at Langston. She wasn't waiting for anyone to notice, wasn't planning a dramatic reveal. This was about creating a record that couldn't be ignored or explained away, a tool for change that worked through persistence rather than spectacle. As the evening light faded outside her window, Nia continued adding entries to her spreadsheet. She wasn't waiting for anyone to save them. She was building something new, something that didn't need headlines to be real. The late spring air carried wildflower scent as Nia and Jeremiah Jackson walked a secluded trail. Sunlight filtered through leaves, creating patterns on the dirt path. Few hikers were out today, giving father and daughter privacy. Jeremiah wore casual hiking clothes instead of his usual pressed suit, appearing more father than attorney general. He matched Nia's pace, something he'd been learning lately. Birds and rustling leaves filled their comfortable silence. Ms. Ellison pled guilty this morning, Jeremiah said with satisfaction. Evidence tampering, among other charges. Nia nodded, eyes on the trail. She'd expected this, but still felt its impact. The Good Order Club is completely disbanded, Jeremiah continued, stepping over a branch. 2 more lawsuits from former students, and Langston's enrollment dropped 20% for next year. At a clearing, Nia sat on a bench overlooking a wildflower valley and sipped water. Jeremiah stood with hands in pockets, looking more human away from marble halls. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "What you did changed how these systems work. I want to fund a student rights initiative in your name." Nia studied his genuine offer but shook her head. "This isn't about my name." Jeremiah sat beside her, curious. "The journalism program's being cut yearly," Nia continued firmly. "That's where money should go. Give students tools to tell their own stories." She showed her sketchbook with newspaper clippings and statistics. 6 schools in our district have lost their paper. 3 more publish only online. Stories need physical space. Jeremiah examined her organized information. "Journalism grants for student media programs?" Nia nodded. "Everyone wanted to tell my story, but hundreds never make the news. Stories need to be told by people living them." A butterfly landed nearby. Jeremiah watched it, pride and humility crossing his face. "I'll make some calls tomorrow," he said. That evening, Nia sat on her bed with art supplies. Her wall of evidence had evolved into part archive, part gallery. She drew under desk lamplight. The scene emerged, Langston Prep's hallway during her arrest, but with broken handcuffs. Behind her stood students with blank signs, waiting for untold stories. The composition showed light emanating from the signs themselves. She pinned the finished drawing among evidence photos and newspaper clippings. Unlike those past battle documents, this drawing pointed toward a future where silence became strength and blank pages meant possibility. Moonlight filtered through her window, the new drawing capturing light differently. Just the quiet presence of a girl who refused to flinch, backed by endless stories waiting to be told. If you enjoyed the story of Nia, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.